Welcome to Her Success Matters, a podcast exploring how advisors can work together to build a pathway for women to succeed in financial services. I am your host, Christine Shaw, CEO of Investment News. This podcast will give you a rare insider access to the top financial services executives who are taking action to break down the barriers for the next generation of female advisors. Welcome to Her Success Matters, a podcast that helps women build a pathway to having a more successful career in financial services. I'm your host, Christine Shaw, Chief Executive Officer of Investment News. Today, I'm joined by a trailblazer for women in financial services, Monica O'Reilly, the new leader of Deloitte's Financial Services Division and the first woman to hold this role in Deloitte's 175-year history. Monica, congratulations. We are so thrilled to have you join us today. Welcome to Her Success Matters.
Thank you so much, Christine, for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
So, Monica, let's jump right in. Tell us, please, and the listeners, a little about your background and how it has shaped your perspective of female inclusion in this industry.
Let me start, Christine, by maybe painting a bit of a picture for you on my career path, which has not been a straight path, I would say. It's been a winding road with many inflection points. A little bit of my story. I was born in San Francisco, but my parents emigrated to Northern Ireland when I was a child. And I emigrated back to the US after college and began working in banking in the early 90s. I started in more of the technology side of banking. I was started off in the loan sort of supervision, loan review. But at the same time, I went back to college to do computer programming because I felt like tech was becoming more of an enabler to business. And I wanted to learn more about that. And so I started to learn how to do COBOL programming and lots of programming that probably doesn't exist very much anymore today. And then in 1995, I went to a consulting firm and fell into professional services, and have been in that field ever since. And when I came to Deloitte in 2002, I primarily was focused in the payment sector because of being in San Francisco, and payments tended to be a very big part of the business environment here. And I worked primarily in that client base. And then over time at Deloitte, I started to become known and was offered opportunities to take on new roles. I led our talent organization for our risk and financial advisory business, focused on revamping the entire business in how we deployed resources, trained resources, recruited resources across the board. Then around 2016, I was asked to take on our banking and capital markets role for the risk practice. And then later took on our regulatory and operational risk leader, which was helping organizations figure out how to run compliance organizations with a lens more focused on technology and how to use technology to modernize compliance and risk functions within financial institutions. And that led me to March of 2020, when I took on the role of the US financial services industry leader, pre-COVID, actually 2 weeks before the lockdown. So that's the story that got me here.
What a fantastic story. And there's so much in that story. I want to go back to, though, you coming from Ireland and immigrating back to the US. That's quite a big moment for a young woman. And tell us a little bit about what drove you to do that. Was it opportunity or just desire?
Yes. So the fact that I had been born in San Francisco, but then emigrated to Northern Ireland, and during a pretty tumultuous time in that country's history, really shaped me. I think it created in me a view of having more of an empathetic ear, being more aware of bias and issues around bias. But to really specifically answer your question around what brought me back, it was really coming back to San Francisco in the early 90s. I think I always knew that I would end up back in the US in some place, but I didn't realize I was actually just going to come right back to the neighborhood I grew up in San Francisco. And that's where I landed. And funny, it was like coming home, because there were many families that my parents had known when we were very young kids that were still there. And also, I happened to land in San Francisco right around the time that the technology, personal computing, was just starting to take hold. You started to see the PC and the Mac. And I remember, the advertisement for the Mac was just mind blowing. And I knew at that time that I needed to be more focused on what the possibilities were around that type of technology and what it could do. And I was very curious. And I think maybe that curiosity is a trait that I was ingrained in me, that allowed me to kind of have the courage to come back to the US, and then additional courage to go explore something different beyond what I had been, educated around in Northern Ireland.
Yeah, the word curiosity, it's interesting that there must be a common thread there, because one of the other amazing women that I interviewed was Angela Picaro, and she talked a lot about curiosity, and she's also in she's in a fintech specific company, but it's just amazing because technology can be very intimidating. And then you take technology and financial services and put those together. And it does take a very curious mind to navigate those industries, and it can be very overwhelming. But I want to talk a little bit about what you said, the word empathy, because that's really important too. I mean, that's a skill that we didn't hear as much about, but if you look at what's gone on and continues to go on in the world at this moment, especially during COVID, that empathy is such an important skill to have as a leader. So, how did you learn to have that or feel that at such a young point in your career?
I think, again, just by virtue of how I grew up, I recognized from an early age that somebody could be in the wrong place at the wrong time and be impacted by events outside of their control. And I think that tuning that started to happen in my childhood really illuminated for me a sense of empathy and understanding that it's not everybody has the same experience that I have. And so you have to be cognizant. Not everybody grows up the same way. And so you have to be cognizant that everyone lives maybe a different life, right? And has things that have shaped them. And so it's also shaped I think my responsibility around making sure I'm inclusive, and that I surround myself with people that tend to be like that. And I think that's a responsibility of leadership, frankly. I think, that old adage, seek to understand before to being understood, that was something that was ingrained in me in an early age, was an ability to seek to understand and lean in a little bit heavier in on conversations that might not be as easily held. And so to me, that shaped a lot of who I am. And I think when I couple that with my leadership attributes, maybe it always comes to this crux between people and possibility, and the fact that people are shaped by their experiences, but there's so much more possibility in what the world can expose you to. And if you just ask another question, and if you are maybe a little bit curious, other things will evolve from that. So I look at empathy as sort of the foundation that led me into some of those other areas of looking at and exploring the aspect of people and possibility.
That's amazing that you've been able to have that perspective, and kudos to you as a leader for understanding that and carrying that forward, which brings me sort of to my next point. So you bring 30 years of experience into your new role with Deloitte. So how will that experience help shape your future decision making?
So 30 years. And as I said, Christine, it's not been a linear path, right?
Yes.
It
Yeah.
has been a path that I have met many people along the way that have shaped that path. And so I think I probably am on somebody's path too. Maybe I have shaped somebody similarly. So I think the responsibility that I have in being maybe the first woman that occupies this role at Deloitte is to be there to pull up people behind me and to think about what might shape their path and to think about opportunities that they may not think of for themselves, but for me to call out, here's something I think you could be well suited to do, and look for those bright sparks of curiosity and just somebody wanting to have the opportunity to do something. I think that was afforded to me. I'd like to afford that to others. But we have a large practice. It's over 10,000 people and 1,000 partners and managing directors just within our financial services practice. So there are a lot of voices I have to listen to. There's a lot of input I take, but ultimately I have to make decisions about the focus areas that we focus on and where we continue to help our clients. Because ultimately our job is to help our clients and shape the future with our clients. And so I think my role will be to couple again the capabilities and skills and building those skills within our people to help our clients really manifest their potential and really think through how they can continue to grow and be successful organizations.
And those are great facts to bring up. And which brings me to, so Deloitte Financial Services, you serve 94% of Fortune 500
Yes.
companies, right? And just think about what you said there. You have 10,000 people in your division, and here you are as a leader. And one statistic we're all too familiar with is that only 7% of Fortune 500 companies are women led. So what a great opportunity for you to be in a position to lead into Fortune 500, influencing people that are serving Fortune 500 companies. It is absolutely amazing. So tell us about the outcomes you experience by having a more diverse and inclusive workforce from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably, obviously, I should say, this is a topic that is front and center in today's corporate environment. And I think it's more important than it's ever been around being and having a diverse and inclusive employee base or partner base to pull from and really think about how we do that. I think about Deloitte. We were one of the first professional services firms to have a focus on women and a women's initiative. And I think our view of making sure that women had a seat at the table and were included in the voices of input and shaping of our future. I think we've now expanded that beyond women to think about how do we have a diverse and inclusive representative body of professionals that have different backgrounds, different ethnicities, and are bringing that to bear to help us drive solutions that are going to be better for our clients. Ultimately, we always come to a much better solution when we have a diverse input into that. And it's going to take time. Are we where we need to be? No. But is any organization there yet? No. I think we are clearly walking the talk. We've invested more into our diverse and underrepresented colleagues. We're forming a Black Action Council that has been formed to really look at how do we continue to elevate and bring to the table all of the aspects of how our Black professionals are feeling. What do they continue to need to have to ensure they have a rich and fruitful and successful career? Similarly, across all of our diverse and employees and professionals, we are looking at how can we continue to elevate and drive a view of management that looks much more like the communities we represent. And so it's a journey. I think we've made strides, but there's certainly more to do in that world.
I couldn't agree with you more, Monica. I mean, if you think about how we've evolved over the past decade, of course, we've talked about it, diversity, inclusion. We've talked about having more females, and yet we make little progress. So I think that now what everyone is demanding, clients, the world, is that we can't just talk about it. We actually have to action this. And I love that you said Deloitte has been a pioneer and one of the first companies to institute a female representation in financial services. So that is terrific. And we need more companies like you and leaders like yourself doing that work. So I'd love to just talk a little bit about, it's not an easy path, as you said. I think you used the word tumultuous, right? And so I'm sure you talk to, well, I've spoken to a lot of women and that sort of feeling comes up. So did you draw on any mentor or sponsor along your pathway to your role today?
Yeah, and again, I think, Christine, just there are so many people that show up as mentors in your career that you may not realize at the time were mentors, but they fast become them. I think about people that I have worked with, clients like Lisa Edwards, who is now at Salesforce. She and another female, Patty Fukami, we worked together in a very large payments organization. And we used to have these things on a Thursday evening called strategery sessions, where we would get together and just talk and share insights and perspectives on how we were progressing in our careers. And it was really a casual conversation to start with, and then it formed into more of a discussion around how could we help each other, and were there connections that I had that could help Patty or could help Lisa, or vice versa. And that became sort of a cornerstone. And then I think about mentors that I've had within the firm that may not know that they've been mentors of mine. I look at, we had the first chairwoman in professional services, Sharon Allen. I had the privilege of meeting Sharon in a number of venues, and she was always very approachable, always looking to help and figure out how to do more. We also, as Deloitte, we also had the first woman CEO in Kathy Engelberg. And there are many women within the firm, and I hope that I'm one of them, that continues to look at how can we pull our professionals behind us, and how can I find the next Monica O'Reilly? How can I find the next financial services industry leader in the sea of talented and brilliant women that we have within the firm? I think that's my responsibility. My responsibility is to always be thinking about how I can help to mentor others behind me, as I have been mentored by others.
Yeah, and Deloitte has done a really good job at having great numbers and representation. So I'm so glad there are companies like that leading the way, and leaders like you who believe it is a responsibility to give back and mentoring, because that's how we get more women to join. Because as I'm sure you know, and I have found in my own career journey, that confidence is a big factor, and sometimes it's hard to find that confidence if you don't have the support
Right.
Of other women and people around you, not just men, not just women, but men too. We've interviewed some amazing men too, because the whole idea of men as allies is really important too. We're all in this together. It's a collective problem to solve.
Yes, Christina, I might just jump off of that a moment too, because
Sure.
at Deloitte, we've really taken into heart this focus around inclusion and allyship. And it is about personal commitment, right? It's all about personal commitment. And our firm has done some research and studies around what are the attributes of inclusive leadership. And they're embedded in what we call the 6 C's, and we live up to these 6 C's in our everyday interactions. And the 6 C's are commitment, courage, cognizance of bias, curiosity, there's that word again, cultural intelligence, and collaboration. And those 6 C's have been shared across our entire leadership organization and of our organization. And the expectation is that we live out those values in how we interact, not only with our clients, but also with our people. And making sure that particularly that inclusion and allyship, this personal commitment to it, using this framework of the 6 C's, is something we're hoping to continue to advance in our culture and embed it in our culture at the firm.
And that is a great example of a company taking action. You're creating it as part of your DNA, who you are, how you behave. And the benefit of that is not just the outcome that you're going to see, but that's going to attract more diverse people to your company, because if they know Deloitte has this as their mission and makes it the personal responsibility of their employees, they're more likely to choose you as they're building their career and come to Deloitte. So that's incredible. Thank you for sharing the succeeds. So important to hear. That makes me really happy and excited. So tell me too, as we're getting closer to time here, any other moments, aha moments, or what's ahead for you personally? I know you're just taking on this role at the beginning of COVID, but
yeah, what's ahead for me? And Christine, maybe I'll take a moment and think back on when I took this role, right? When I took this role, it was in March. I was doing a transition from my predecessor. And he and I were talking back and forth about the strategy and priorities and where the practice was heading. And little did either of us know that 2 weeks after me taking on the role, we would be in lockdown and in the biggest pandemic the world has ever seen. And so one of the things, again, going back to maybe those attributes that I just talked about around courage, it was having the courage to know that we would get through this, right? The courage to respond to what was needed in our firm and at our clients at that moment in time, and think about how to move work into a virtual environment and then continue to run our practices in that light, along with helping our clients navigate the challenges that they had as well. And so if I re-look at my entire career and entire history, I've had these series of inflection points, and this probably was one of the biggest inflection points I've ever had. But an inflection point when I moved as a young child from about 7 years old to Northern Ireland and had to navigate a very different world. That was a big inflection point, coming back into the US in the early 90s. And the view that in the early 90s that technology was going to be at the forefront of what businesses needed to use to enable their growth. And then moving into 2016, when I took on the banking and capital markets role, there was a pivot away from regulatory remediation towards growth, particularly in a lot of the financial institutions. And where was that growth going to come from? And again, technology was another key aspect of that. And how were institutions going to use technology to further integrate their services and products with their customer base? And then last inflection point was when I took this role. Who could have predicted that we would be in a environment with a pandemic, the social impacts that are also happening in our communities, social justice and inequality that's happening within our communities today. And then how was that going to further be an inflection point for what I needed to do for our financial services practice? And what has occurred to me, and I think this is where we see it from a Deloitte, where the future of financial services is headed, is an evolution into human-centered capitalism, where it's not just about the products and services that institutions offer, but it's also about how are those products and services offered to create more financial inclusion, and how are we working with our clients to help them think through the products and services that they offer are done using a level of corporate responsibility, right? That there's some social responsibility, and that we're all walking the talk. And I think that is the next path, an inflection point that we're on right now, and that we're going to join is a move towards this more human-centered capitalism.
I agree on several of the points you made. First of all, evolution, absolutely. This is a huge inflection point and evolution in financial services with technology being at the forefront of it, but that technology with that human relationship matched up, and the diversity around that has never been more needed than it is today. And so good for you as a leader and just as a person, Monica, that during these inflection points throughout both your personal life and career, that you've been able to lean in and use those as moments to become a stronger leader and what got you to where you are today. And so congratulations again, as I said at the beginning. And really, it's great to see people like you and companies like Deloitte who take that personal responsibility and are making it happen. So just sort of as we wrap up, I mean, I think the key things you've talked about is number one, recognizing those inflection points and doing something about them, having the curiosity to find out more, having empathy along your path, and also looking at your organization and ensuring that the culture speaks to an inclusive environment and that within the organization you take personal responsibility both at the leadership role and at the individual level and demand that of your employees. So I think those are great points and actions that you and Deloitte are taking. And then Monica, my final question that I ask all my guests is, tell me why, in your words, her success matters.
Christine, her success matters because I am a product of the successful women that came before me, and I am standing on the shoulders of those that have come before me. Consequently, I have a responsibility to reach behind me and pull others forward and to help women lead authentic, fulfilling, and rich careers that allow them to be who they need to be and to do the things they need to do, but do it together and supporting each other. And I think her success matters because all of our success matters.
That's so well stated. Thank you for that final point. I really appreciate your time today. And again, we want to say congratulations and we wish you the best. And we hope to stay in close contact with you over the next journey or of your phase of your career.
Thank you so much, Christine. It's been a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Her Success Matters. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available, and share this podcast with others that believe her success matters.
The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Investment News. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service providers with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.